Hi everybody, we have Ashley Bridges here today. She's going to be talking about bioactive enclosures and how you can take various things, natural resources, and implement them in your own enclosures.
Alright. Hi, as he said, Ashley Bridges. Nice to meet you all. I'm the owner of Northern Red Geckos. A little bit about myself. I'm an environmental science major, so I'm really lucky that I get to actually take some of what I learned in school and use it towards my hobby a little bit. I probably made my first planted aquarium like 10 or 11, which was really fun because my dad was like not quite realizing how much it would cost. It can cost a bit. So that's kind of where it started. Then I kind of got out of it a little bit, but still worked in like schools and stuff, take care of the reptiles and everything. And then a couple years ago, we started to get back into frogs, particularly dark frogs. And when we did, of course, getting back to the bioactive terrarium is the easiest way to keep them. So I guess I'll start with what is a bioactive terrarium? The bioactive terrarium is basically you're just trying to replicate a nutrient system. Just a complete ecosystem in a box is what I like to call it. You want it self-sufficient, mostly hands-off, all that stuff. It has to have water, soil, nutrients, light, microfauna, macrofauna, all that kind of thing. Luckily, there are a lot of benefits that come with bioactive. Probably one of the best, and one of the ones that I find most herpers really like is you don't have to clean. It is the best thing about it. I have a room of terrariums that I love to walk into because I have my workhorse room, which I have to clean, and I walk into this room, and I just enjoy it because it's all done. And the nice thing is, the longer you leave the tanks, the better they usually look. This one is probably 3-4 years old now. And as you can see, you do not need anything fancy. I do have exoterras and stuff like that, custom-made terrariums. But this is actually just a 20-gallon converted. So you don't have to invest in like these big, super expensive ones. You can start with something smaller, and it works just as well. I make a point of not cleaning because, ironically, cleaning will actually do the opposite. It will hurt your bioactive system. So I clean the front glass, but if you guys were up here looking at the tank, you can obviously see the side glass is green. But that's a really good biofilm. You really want that. It's actually really healthy for all the animals in there, stuff like that. It's basically the ecosystem's immune system. So it does help with, I find, if I switch an animal over to bioactive, they are so much happier. They are so much better. I mean, you're basically introducing them to different bacteria and everything that they find that would interact with their immune system that can help them a lot. Same with the plants. A lot of the bacteria in the soil are really, really just very helpful for the plants, for the uptake of nutrients. I'll get a little bit more into that after. So I'm going to go over basically bottom up, start from the bottom. The first thing to get an actual well-running bioactive terrarium is you need a solid drain layer. See a little bit in there. Over time it does get a little tougher, but you can use all sorts of stuff. Hydro balls, I have Hydrocon. I actually go to the hydro store and I get them because it's way cheaper. Like I can get a big bag for about the same as you get one of the little itty bitty ones, Petro. So it works the same. You can also use gravel in anything. I just like this stuff because it's porous, so it also holds the nutrients really well. Then what I always recommend is putting a screen over it, just to separate out, because basically you don't want, keeps it separate. So, because you don't really want your substrate getting up and in it, because then it will just all wick back up. So basically, some of the biggest things I see mistakes people doing with the drain layer is filling it up to the brim. Once you do that, all of that water is being basically sucked into the substrate, and when that happens, it gets soaked. When it gets soaked, it fills up the air pockets, which plants microfauna need. It drowns out your microfauna, and it will actually cause a lot of root rot. So you really don't actually want your substrate to be wet. Luckily with the drain system, if you do it about like half full or so, it will naturally just evaporate up into the soil. So it will keep the soil moist without having to do anything, without any guesswork, without anything like that. Usually in my tanks, I try to keep a little corner right by the glass, kind of pull back, pour water in there. If you need to add to the drain layer, you will occasionally. But otherwise, just mist and leave it alone is your best bet. Which, misting, I will say, like, I'll go into some more of the desert stuff, but it's usually my stuff that I usually do is a lot of tropical, so that's going to be a lot more focus. I do recommend misting, obviously, these tanks. It's good for the plants, and it's actually, especially if you're using a boreal species, that is their natural drinking water. They don't climb down the tree to go over to the lake to take a sip. It rains, do condensation, that sort of stuff. That's where they get their water source. So having those droplets on the plants is really, really good for them. Particularly if you do it, say you have a nocturnal species, mist at night, diurnal species, mist during the day. Oh, and I will say I do mist, and this kind of comes down to knowing your species as well. For some of my desert species, they rely on condensation, so it's always sometimes good to just kind of in the morning give them a little mist, because they'll actually go and they'll lick up those droplets as well. So if you're setting up bioactive for them, also a nice thing to kind of add in for misting. So then the next thing, which is honestly the real foundation of it, is the soil. This is probably the most important part. If you mess this up, everything else does. Not the end, but like all the greenery. So I usually recommend people, and what I always do is I Google where are the animals from? What region are they from? Because we are so used to these care sheets that tell us this, this, and this, and they're, honestly, I find them very lacking. Whereas you have a lot of scientific research out there, very, very easy to pick up. You can go, okay, the animals found in this, this, and this region. There's a lot of geological studies on those regions as well, the soil composition. So you can usually find like a rough, and they'll actually break it down by percent, like 30% clay, 20% sand, so on and so forth. So if you are working with an otter, basically environment, that's your best way to go. I know I have, especially when it comes to desert species, which is why I only have like a sampling, but they're very like all different. Desert species, you'll find this the most. Some are on sand dunes, some are on mixes, which is why you get like a lot of trouble, bearded dragons, leopard geckos. That's why people usually, it's kind of hard to get their bioactive right. So I always recommend people just Googling that stuff first. But most of, like if you want to set up like a tropical mix, your best bet, and what I use is I actually will get earthworm castings, which are great, but just like earthworm food. So that will give in a lot of food for the plants. Coconut fiber is good to add in. It is not good on its own. It has no nutritional anything, really. So I usually recommend not just using just that. You can get different soils. I'll usually get like a loam, like an untreated loam. You can get a lot. And a lot of things you can find that don't have anything added into it, but they'll actually list off all the bacteria strains on the back if you're getting it in a bag, which is really, really good. Pay attention to those because those are really good bacteria to have. And then I'll usually add in peat moss, chunks of coconut, like actual chunks of coconut husk or sphagnum moss. These will help create those air pockets. It will keep it from getting too compressed. You really don't want to get too compressed because it makes it harder for the roots. So kind of a combination of the lighter, fluffier stuff with some of the heavier stuff that will hold the moisture is kind of what you're looking for. I also added charcoal because that's another one. It's really good. It's very porous. So it will actually hold a lot of nutrients as well, and it doesn't break down so quick, which is also really nice. For desert species, I know a lot of people use, and I do too, the screened sand. For a lot of desert species, depending on what they are, screened sand's not so great. It's actually made mechanically by people. So if you look at it under a microscope, it's sharp. Whereas if you get, like what I'll use, because I work with a species that has very soft, sensitive skin but lives in the desert, is quartz sand. And if you feel it, granted it's mixed with this stuff, but it's almost silky to the feel. It does not feel like sand really. So usually I recommend people going quartz sand. You can find it and mix that in. It's just a little bit more natural. It's what would be in their environment for the most part. So you can mix that. A lot of places, again, it will vary depending on the environment, but clay is a good thing to add in. Ironically, there is a lot of clay in desert areas. I know like Nigeria actually has a lot of clay. Topsoil is usually good, and rocks. Always like to do rocks, dried leaves, which you can use the same dried leaves for either. Both of them work really well. As far as the microfauna for these guys, I stick to beetles for the desert because obviously there's not a lot of food. There's not as much. There's some decay, but there's not quite as much. It's going to be more surface stuff, so better to get those. So going into the microfauna, bacteria has a really, really bad rep, especially I feel like in our industry where it's like, oh, bacteria's bad, we have to clean and sanitize everything because it's gonna kill our animals. It's not. It's really, really good. They have a lot of good gut bacteria. They have a lot of symbiotic relationships with different bacteria, and they can have a lot of symbiotic relationships with bacteria in their ecosystem. Their ecosystem is pearly, clean, just, looks great. They're missing something. So, I mean, it's good, but it's immune-wise can be lacking. So, as far as bacteria goes, it is basically the key in your soil. Bacteria is literally the driving force behind the nitrogen system, which plants need. Nitrogen comes in a way that plants can't use it, and basically the bacteria breaks it down and makes it usable for plants. So without them, you wouldn't have your plants, essentially. So this is why I always tell people, if you're setting up a biological aquarium, put it in, don't clean it, don't do anything to it, let them live. The fungus as well is really good. There's actually a fungus that will work with the roots of the plants to help them absorb more. So it's kind of one of those, I know some people will see like fungal growth and everything and really freak out and want to like clean it and get rid of it. Don't. Just let it, because if it's bad, this tank already has an immune system, it's going to take care of itself. If it's good, don't get rid of it. So there's that. We can basically thank the bacteria in the soil and the microfauna in the soil for about 80 to 90% of the nutrients that is in the soil. So they're really important. So going up a size a little bit, I'm sure you guys have all seen Isopod Springtails or heard of them. They're these little bugs, which I have a couple of these little guys. They're probably going to be a little too hard to see, but there we go. So they are these really, really awesome little bugs. They're super duper useful. They go around, and every time your animal poops, it cleans it up. You don't have to do it. So, and they'll break it down, be their fecal matter, and then the bacteria take care of that. So it's just a really nice system to have there. And I mean, they will work on, we have 3 red-footed tortoises in a tortoise room. I don't clean that tortoise room. I have beetles and everything else that just, the poop doesn't last an hour. And if anybody's ever dealt with tortoise pooping, you really want to know that. So it's really good to that they take care of that.
You gotta get it before they do.
Yeah, that too. They'll eat it. But so, like I said, isopods are literally like my best friend. I love them. They are the best, and you can get them all sorts of really pretty colors: oranges and purples, and pinks and zebras and stripes and Dalmatian. There's so many different kinds. So that's the other thing, is make sure that the species that you're getting is okay for the tank that you're doing, because if you're doing a tropical, you want a tropical species of isopod. If you're doing an arid, you want an arid species of isopod. And say you want a temperate forest species, you're still going to want something a little bit different, just because they have different humidity needs. So that's just one thing to look out for. But most places will list off what they are. And then, like I said, earthworms. You just put a couple earthworms in, they just replicate, and it's amazing. And they're actually really good for aerating the soil as well, and getting those air pockets that you really want in there. So those are really awesome.
Well, when you're like reptile or amphibian, actually eat the earthworm.
Sometimes. I have a tiger salamander that I'll just get a thing of earthworms and dump it in there and go, I have to add on more soon. It gives them something to hunt, but say my crested gecko, I'm not gonna touch it. They go underneath, and usually you have to dig them up. So if you have a burrowing species, they're probably gonna find them, but not always. So that is the other nice thing about the earthworms, is that keep track of how they are doing in that tank if you do have a burrowing species. But earthworms are generally really nutritious, so it's not so bad if they eat them. And so then for the top layer, which is basically, you have your, like I said, you got this down, you got that, your soil, now you need something to go on top. Because as you can see, most tanks, you can't see the soil in there. What is probably used a lot is leaf litter. It's great. If you go outside of the woods right now and you're walking around the woods, what do you see? It's all leaf litter. The leaves from the plants falling down, decomposing, and all that is part of the cycle. I don't take leaves out of here. If they fall off, that's for the cleaning crew, and it turns into food. So that's part of the cycle. Just don't try to. It's another part of this. Don't try to clean and make it look pretty all the time. There are times in which you'll have some dead leaves. I'm pretty sure. Yeah, I have a couple dead ones up there. It's fine. But you can buy them and litter the ground with them, which is really good. Seed pods are another one. They're isopods really tend to really like them, so I'll usually recommend those as well. Moss can be really great. You just have to be careful what kind. Some like to be up high, some like to be low. So just be aware of what kind of moss you're getting. But for the most part, moss isn't too picky. So you can kind of toss that in, and it just makes a nice little barrier over the substrate. Cork bark's another really good one. I love leaning cork bark, especially depending on what species you have. A lot of them will make burrows and stuff under there. They'll really appreciate it, or climb over it. Cork bark and rocks will actually give them, if you're in a tropical setup, the substrate isn't soaked, but it's usually a little moist. And one of the things that I know a lot of froggers have issues with is foot rot. Usually because they have really nice substrate and nowhere to get away from it. So rock platforms are really great. They also make really great feeding stations. And the cork bark, just something to get up on and drop, basically, if you're doing terrestrial. And the microfauna really like to eat under it. So say you're going to trying to collect some of your isopods, you want to put them into another tank, you have that cork bark there, just flip that over, you're gonna have a lot. So
You bring me fruit flies, right?
and then the plants, which are the fun part, in my opinion. I'm a nursery. I'm a manager at a plant nursery, so me and plants, this is the fun part of it for me. The benefit of plants, and that I think a lot of people take for granted, is not only are they natural looking, they look pretty to us. They're really good for the animals because they give them hiding spots. They give them natural and I'm not talking about the fake little thing that goes on the side. Those work and everything, but they're kind of flat. It gives them a plant to get up and into. They provide some really nice shady spots. I mean, this tank actually goes back here. Not that you'll be able to see it, but earlier that's where the frog was hiding. So it gives them really nice, just natural place to get away from the light, to get away from view. Especially if you're having a display animal, you really they need a place to get a break. They don't want to be in the spotlight all day long. So, so plants are like just really great for that. There's also, depending on the species you have, they can be really, really good for climbing. This actually goes for desert species as well. I have some tall succulents, and I have some really little geckos, and they love climbing right up this. So it doesn't matter, I'm not just talking tropical here, but the desert guys will appreciate it as well. Just a little something. Just make sure that whatever plant that you're putting in will kind of be able to withstand the animal that it's in with. Like, I can't put in a Phytonia with my tortoises. It will be dead within like an hour. So, even if they didn't eat it, they trample it. So it's kind of things like that. I have the same problem with my leechy. She kills everything.
Leechianas gecko?
Oh, they're bad. They just hate plants. I don't know what it is. But these guys, luckily with the frogs, they don't really do anything. But say I have some climbing geckos, the crested geckos, the cat geckos, pothos has a really, and I know it's one of those, like, some people are really snobby about it. Oh, it's a weed plant, who cares? I love pothos. I love them in my tanks. I get that they get aggressive, but they have such thick roots and such thick stems that stuff can climb on them. And they can rest on their leaves, and then they can rest under their leaves. So I think that those are really, if you're just setting it up for the animal and you're not too worried about, you know, I want all my plants to be for $20 clippings, it's a pretty good way to go. The only thing that, and it's something that I see happen a lot when you set up a new tank, is overcrowding. So there's something called new tank syndrome. Basically, somebody gets a tank, they throw everything in, and they totally forget that, you know, there's only, at this point, the system is very limited in its resources. You have new soil, you put some stuff in, but the bacteria aren't there in the numbers to really be pumping out the nutrients that you need. So, when you go to put in, it's better to put in less plants in the beginning and add them in as the system seems to be doing okay. You also want to avoid overcrowding because they'll be fighting for root space and nutrients, and also, depending on the species you get, light. So there are a lot of plant species that like to be up high, and you can kind of see this pothos cannot get enough of the light. It is up in its business. The Phytonia down here are completely fine being down lower. That's just naturally where they grow. So that is kind of a thing. And I try to warn people not to leave the front of your tank, which I know really stinks because animals can hide right up front. But you're more likely to see the animal if they have. I try to stick at least one thing right here, because if they're up front, they want a quick dash in to get away. So it's just kind of, they're more likely to come out and be seen if they think that they have a nice escape route too. So keep that in mind. Don't just shove a big plant in the back, shove someone and leave a big empty gap in the middle. They're going to be hiding in that back wall. I will say, as far as when you set up a new tank, some of the things that can help, you can add in different things to the soil right off the bat. I will actually use any kind of like MRP, but Pangea. You guys have crested geckos or whatever, let it dry, flip it into a bin, crumple it up, and I sprinkle some in and mix it into my soil when I'm first setting it up, because it makes them it's really nutritious for your cleaning crib. So that is kind of a good way to help combat some of that new tank syndrome. So some plants, and I don't have them all in here, but that I usually, if you're setting up a new tank or whatever, some of the easier staple plants, wandering Jew, Phytonia, like I said, the pothos. If you kill pothos, you gotta reevaluate a little bit. Any kind of creeping figs, bromeliads. Bromeliads are actually really great. I don't have them in this tank anymore, but they're really good for mounting on the backs because they take all of their water in through the top. Basically, the leaves catch it, so they don't really have to worry about their roots, so you don't need to put them in soil. So that's also a really nice kind of something to put up higher that gives a little more hiding spot, and I found that a lot of animals like to rest in the leaves, whether it be geckos, frogs, anything, really enjoys that, so. And probably the most complex and least fun topic is the lighting itself. As you know, lighting, I don't know if you guys have ever seen all the different light options that they get really intense. There's so many different options. So luckily I have my husband's electrical engineer, so I kind of shove a lot of that off on him. But I did have to learn some of this stuff myself, unfortunately. And so the importance of good lighting can really affect your plants if you don't, they'll give you signs if your light's not strong enough. Your plants will get really lightly. I've seen photonias reaching all the way up here and have like a leaf, and that's it. Like they're just like these long little sad things. So watch your plants is usually the best way to tell if you actually picked up a good light or not. They will react accordingly. The other important thing with light that a lot of people take for granted is that day-night cycle. It is important for animals. It is important for reptiles, amphibians, us. For the plants, it's called Circadian Rhythm. It's basically the 24-hour rhythm that you go through in your day. And so what a lot of people don't realize is that time that the lights are off, the plants are stopping some of their processes, and now they're going back and they're fixing UVB damage, any other kind of, it's kind of like us, like our bodies repair at night, so do theirs. So they need that light off, they need that certain amount of time in order to repair. So it might look pretty, but keeping your tank lights on for 20 hours a day is probably not good for anything in there. So just keep that in mind. And the location that they came from, how close to the equator, all that stuff, can also be a big effect as well. Because as we all know, up here, we can be out in the sun all day and be okay. If you go to Florida, you're gonna burn, because it's just, the sun's much stronger there. So it's kind of similar to some of the animals and some of the plants in here as far as light intensity goes. So some things that make a good light, there are a few factors of things you can look at. A lot of them will have, not all of them, but like a lot of them will have something called PAR. It's the photosynthetically active radioaction. So basically, how it's making the plant grow. How well, like that number is going to dictate how well the plant's going to grow under it. You'll usually see them, they can get a little blue and purpley, they're kind of high, but it will directly affect the way the plants grow. Generally, you want to aim for like 400 to 700 range for that. They'll have a big scale, but those are the numbers that you'll want to look for. Because if you have too much, your plants are going to grow at a rate in which the ecosystem cannot keep up with, and you don't really want that. Just because you don't want to have to keep introducing. Like generally, like I don't have to add fertilizer to this because it's already taking care of itself. If I upped the plant growth with using a light, it will probably be so that's to be aware of that. There's also the CRI, which is the color rendering index. This is basically what it will look like how you perceive those colors in the tank. So you want one that's like a full spectrum lighting, like 80 plus, because that's going to be a little closer to what sunlight looks like. So it's not, you're not gonna get weird. Like I know like we've probably all put on that light on the tank and been like, oh, that kind of makes my animal look like sometimes cool or sometimes not so cool. But, so that's just a CRI that's a little off. And then there's also color temperature, which that one you will probably see the most with light bulbs. If you're looking, you can find them, that's almost on every bulb. For tanks, you're best off going the 5,000K to 67,000K, just because it will be most like natural light. It will look the most like sunlight, which is essentially what we want to do. We want to make it look like sunlight. Like, you might think that it's really cool to have like pink light in there, but I'm sure your animal might not like it quite as much. So, and then kind of the last thing, which comes up a lot, I actually get this at work and here, is UVB. It is a myth that plants require UVB to grow. They don't. And proof of that is the fact that everything grows in greenhouses that gets shipped up here, because the greenhouse is not allowed the UVB. They only need full spectrum lighting. UVB plants actually adapt to protect themselves from UVB and have to repair from the damage, just like we do with our skin when we're to the sun. So if you're using UVB, which is recommended for diurnal animals, just make sure that your plants can handle it, or in a shaded area of the tank. A lot of times you'll start to see signs. They'll come up. You'll see the ends. They'll actually burn. Like the UVB radiation will actually burn them. So it just means that you need to get them either a little further away or tuck under another plant, just something to kind of help them out. So, but I will say there is one benefit to the plants for that, is that the UVB can actually help the immune system of the plant, because it not only kind of, goes after the plant a little bit, goes after all the bad bacteria and everything on the plant. So it can help kind of with that antibacterial effect on it. And that was about it. That is how, those are the main components of a bioactive terrarium. So it sounds difficult, but once you've done it once or twice, it's not so bad. And the more you do it, the easier it gets. At this point, I just make giant cups of this stuff, and we'll do multiple tanks at once, and you're all set. And so I will take a second to say that these frogs do not live in this tank. Just for anybody that was concerned, they do have a larger tank, so I'll talk a moment about that. These are Phyllobates Terribilis. Some people may have heard of them. They are critically endangered in the wild. They are really, really not doing good at all, because in their region there's a lot of mining, there's a lot of deforestation, and they only live in a small region, about 2 miles or something like that. Like, it's not big. And unfortunately, they are also the most, well, fortunately for them, unfortunately, they are the most poisonous species on the planet. These guys are safe. They're captive bred. So they're not. It's in their wild diet. But because of that, natives are terrified of them. So trying to get conservation in their area is really tough. Hey, save that frog that like kills your children if they pick it up. That's a tough argument. So, but they are really cool. So I figured I'd bring them down, just get people kind of see them. And they're probably the most bold because they're not really worried about anything eating them. It's not a problem. Nothing wants to eat them. So, and that's it. If anybody has any questions?
Nice session.
Is it anything like a fish tank when you set up the environment and then let it sit and wait a while and stabilize before you throw animals in?
Yeah, it usually does help with that. I'll usually, like, I've had tanks set up 6-7 months prior. If I have an empty tank hanging around, I just set it up, and I'm like, I don't know what's going in here. Maybe something, maybe usually it does make it easier. It's a double-edged sword, because you're not getting the animal fecal matter, so that's why it's a little better to add some more additive type things for the stuff, like, the isopods and everything to eat. But it also does give the system a little bit of a chance, new plants rooting down. You don't need things bouncing on them and uprooting them. I've had that happen a couple times. So it does pay off for that.
Where would you typically be able to get Isopod Springtails?
You can usually buy them online. I know there's Facebook pages. Expos are really good. Honestly, you can go out in your yard. I would recommend, if you get them from your yard, to colonize them first and culture them for a couple months before introducing them to an egg. But I mean, you can find them, and know that like the ones that we find around here might not like the, you know, those, that setup. But if you have like a temperate species, even like a crested gecko with like mid-range humidity,